When the great Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, it left a massive power vacuum in its wake. Imagine the chaos. Roads fell into disrepair, trade routes vanished, and barbarian tribes carved up the old imperial lands. In this swirling vortex of uncertainty, people looked for a new source of stability and authority. They found it rather surprisingly in the Bishop of Rome. While kings and warlords fought for scraps of territory, the Pope, as he came to be known, represented something more enduring. He was the spiritual successor to St. Peter, the rock upon whom Jesus had promised to build his church. This gave him a unique kind of legitimacy that no sword or castle could ever truly match. He was a beacon of order in a deeply disordered world. The fall of Rome was, in a way, the best thing that ever happened to the papacy. With no emperor looking over his shoulder in the West, the Pope was free to act. Pope Leo I, for example, famously met with Attila the Hun in 452 and convinced him not to sack Rome. Whether through divine persuasion or a very large bribe, it worked. This single act demonstrated that the Pope could achieve what armies could not. He was becoming a political player, a diplomat, and a protector of the people. This role was not just spiritual, it was intensely practical. The church began to organize food supplies, repair aqueducts, and provide a basic form of governance when no one else would, slowly but surely weaving itself into the very fabric of daily life across the fragmented continent. This early period was all about building foundations. Popes like Gregory the Great, at the end of the 6th century, were brilliant administrators. He wasn't just a holy man, he was a master organizer. He managed the vast estates owned by the church, known as the patrimony of St. Peter, turning them into a source of immense wealth and influence. He also sent missionaries like Augustine of Canterbury all across Europe. Their mission was to convert the pagan kings of the Anglo-Saxons and other groups. Every new kingdom that converted to Roman Christianity became another piece on the Pope's ever-expanding chessboard, looking to Rome, not a distant emperor, for spiritual guidance and ultimate authority. So you see, the Pope didn't just inherit power, he actively built it from the ruins of an old world. He offered people a sense of continuity and hope. While earthly kingdoms rose and fell with startling regularity, the kingdom of God, represented by the Pope in Rome, seemed eternal and unshakable. This idea was incredibly powerful. It meant that even the most fearsome warrior king was, in the end, just a mortal man, while the Pope held the keys to heaven itself. This spiritual authority was the bedrock upon which centuries of papal power would be constructed, setting the stage for an epic struggle for the soul of Europe. As Europe moved into the High Middle Ages, the Pope's influence grew from a flicker to a bonfire. His authority wasn't just about grand politics, it touched the life of every single person, from a humble peasant to a mighty lord. The church was the center of village life. It was where you were baptized, married, and eventually buried. The local priest was your connection to God, and that priest answered to a bishop, who in turn answered to the Pope in Rome. This created a vast continent-wide hierarchy, a spiritual chain of command that was more organized and far-reaching than any king's government. The Pope could issue decrees known as papal bulls that were considered law across all of Christendom. This power was made real through a set of powerful spiritual tools. The most fearsome of these was excommunication. If a king or a noble defied the Pope, he could be cast out of the church. This was a spiritual death sentence. It meant he was denied the sacraments and, in theory, doomed to an eternity in hell. But it was also a political disaster. An excommunicated ruler's subjects were no longer required to obey him. This gave his rivals the perfect excuse to rebel and try to seize his throne. The Pope could also place an entire kingdom under an interdict, which meant no church services could be held. No marriages, no baptisms, no last rites. This put immense pressure on a ruler, as his own people would often rise up in protest, demanding he make peace with the Pope. The church also became the main center of learning and culture. Monasteries across Europe painstakingly copied ancient texts, preserving the knowledge of Greece and Rome that might otherwise have been lost forever. They were the universities, the libraries, and the publishing houses of their day, all rolled into one. This monopoly on education meant that most of the people who could read and write were churchmen. As a result, kings and nobles relied heavily on bishops and clerks to run their governments, draft their laws, and act as their advisors. This placed men loyal to the church at the very heart of secular power, ensuring the Pope's influence was felt in every royal court. Furthermore, the church controlled a huge amount of land and wealth. Through tithes, a tax requiring everyone to give 1/10 of their income to the church, and vast donations from nobles hoping to secure their place in heaven, the papacy became an economic powerhouse. It was the largest landowner in all of Europe. This wealth funded the construction of magnificent cathedrals that soared towards the heavens, physical symbols of the church's power and prestige. It also gave the Pope the financial muscle to operate independently of any single king, allowing him to play one ruler against another in the great game for control of medieval Europe. The 11th century saw the Pope's power reach a dramatic boiling point in what historians call the Investiture Controversy. For a long time, kings and emperors had been appointing their own bishops and abbots. This was called lay investiture. From their point of view, it made perfect sense. These churchmen controlled huge amounts of land and wealth within their kingdoms. But a new reformist papacy, led by figures like Pope Gregory VII, declared this unacceptable. The Pope insisted that only the Church could appoint its own officials. It was a fundamental clash. Who was truly in charge of Christendom, the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor? This wasn't just a theological debate, it was a raw struggle for ultimate authority. The conflict came to a head in a famous and almost theatrical event. In 1077, the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, who had been excommunicated by Pope Gregory VII for defying him, found his power crumbling. His nobles were in open revolt, using the Pope's decree as their excuse. Desperate, Henry traveled across the frozen Alps in the middle of winter to the Pope's castle at Canossa in Italy. For 3 days, the most powerful man in Europe stood barefoot in the snow, dressed as a penitent pilgrim, begging the Pope for forgiveness. Eventually, Gregory lifted the excommunication. While the political struggle continued for decades, the image of an emperor begging a pope for mercy was a stunning demonstration of papal power. Then came the Crusades, the ultimate expression of papal might on an international stage. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a sermon in Clermont, France, calling on the knights of Europe to stop fighting each other, and instead marched to the Holy Land to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. The response was astonishing. He promised remission of sins for all who went, a powerful motivator. Tens of thousands answered his call, creating vast armies that marched across continents under the banner of the cross. This was something no king or emperor could have done. The Pope, and only the Pope, was able to unite the warring factions of Europe and direct their military energy towards a single holy goal. The Crusades reshaped Europe and cemented the Pope's role as its leader. For nearly 2 centuries, the papacy was the coordinating force behind this massive military, political, and religious enterprise. Popes levied taxes across Europe to fund the expeditions, created new military orders like the Knights Templar, who answered directly to them, and acted as the supreme commanders of Christendom's holy war. While the Crusades had mixed results on the battlefield, their political impact was immense. They elevated the papacy to the very pinnacle of its power, making the Pope in Rome look less like a spiritual guide and more like a supreme monarch of all Christian nations. Just as a flame burns brightest right before it begins to fade, the immense power of the medieval papacy could not last forever. By the 14th century, the foundations of its supremacy started to show serious cracks. One of the biggest reasons for this decline was the rise of a stronger, more centralized nation-states, particularly in France and England. Kings like Philip IV of France began to build effective tax systems and loyal national armies. They no longer needed the church's administrative help as much, and they certainly didn't like the idea of vast amounts of money from their lands flowing to Rome. They started to see the Pope not as a universal spiritual father, but as a rival foreign power. This new reality led to a direct and damaging confrontation. In the early 1300s, King Philip IV of France decided he wanted to tax the clergy. Pope Boniface VIII furiously resisted, issuing a papal bull that declared the Pope had absolute power over everyone, including kings. Philip's response was shocking. He sent his agents to Italy, where they captured the Pope and roughed him up. Boniface died shortly after. This event, known as the Outrage of Anagni, was a humiliation from which the papacy never fully recovered. It proved that a determined king with a strong army could now defy the Pope and get away with it. The spiritual weapon of excommunication was starting to lose its terror. What followed was even worse for papal prestige. In 1309, a French pope, Clement V, moved the entire papal court from Rome to Avignon, a city on the border of France. This Avignon papacy lasted for nearly 70 years and was a disaster for the church's image. The popes in Avignon were seen as puppets of the French king. They lived in incredible luxury, and the court became known for corruption and greed. Critics across Europe began to question the Pope's claim to universal authority when he so clearly served the interest of one nation. The papacy, which had built its power on being above the squabbles of mere kings, now looked like just another political player. The final blow came with the Great Western Schism in 1378. After the papacy finally returned to Rome, a dispute over the next election led to a catastrophic split. One pope was elected in Rome, and a rival pope was elected in Avignon. For a time, there were even 3 rival popes, all claiming to be the one true successor to St. Peter, all excommunicating each other and their followers. This farcical situation shattered the unity of the Church and fatally undermined the Pope's authority. People wondered how the papacy could be divinely guided when it couldn't even decide who was in charge. This chaos paved the way for future challenges to its power, setting the stage for the Reformation.